9:01 according to my clock. Could we have a roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Wiedemann,
Here.
Commissioner Jacob-Zoon,
It appears that Commissioner Jacob-Zoon is connecting to audio. Will return.
Commissioner Holcamp,
Here.
Commissioner Purnell,
Here.
Commissioner Nelson,
Here.
Chair Ogle,
Here.
Presently, we're just awaiting Commissioner Jacob-Zoon's connection, and then we will finalize the roll call.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is he just muted?
no, it says it's connecting.
He lives on the coast, so it may take a while.
I believe we're ready.
Commissioner Jacob-Zoon, are you here? You're muted.
I am here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Jacob-Zoon. Has roll call.
That's it.
Roll call has been conducted.
Okay, thank you. Effective.
She muted herself.
Commissioner
Madam
Ogle,
Chair, you're muted.
Madam Chair,
Let's try this again.
proceed.
Effective March 27th, 2020, the Mendocino County Planning Commission meetings are being conducted virtually and not available for in-person public participation pursuant to State Executive Order number N-29-20. Meetings are live streamed and available for viewing on the Mendocino County YouTube page at https://www.youtube.com/Mendocino County Video. In order to participate in order to minimize the risk of exposure during this time of emergency, the public may participate digitally in meetings by sending announcements to pbscommissions@mendocinocounty.org in lieu of personal attendance. All public comment will be made immediately available to the commissioners, staff, and the general public as they are received and processed by staff and can be viewed as attachments to this meeting agenda at the Planning Commission agenda page. Requests for telecomment are required to be submitted prior to 7 o'clock a.m. the morning of the meeting. If you requested to speak under public expression, please call in now. Do we have a determination of legal notice?
Legal notice has been determined.
Okay, thank you. And agenda item 3 is the director's report. Do we have a director's report?
Good morning, Chair Ogle. No, there's no report from the director.
Any questions for the director? I do have one, Director Schultz, and I'm not sure if I address it to you, and I apologize, I haven't had a chance to go online to check. But I know that the Pine Mountain cell phone tower was referred to the Board of Supervisors, and I believe they held a meeting on October 20th. Do you know what the status of that? Did the board deny it or approve it?
Well, I'm not sure. We'll respond to it.
Yes, I mean, what I'd like to do is defer that question, answering it to later. I want to see where Julie is. And then on matters from staff, I'll answer that.
Okay, thank you. And maybe we could bring it up again under matters from the commission, which is later on the agenda. Would that be appropriate, Director
Yes,
Schultz?
Chair Ogle, I want to just confer with Julie on where she's at with it, and then so I can give you a full briefing on it. And I'll do that at the matters from staff, I believe, in the end of the agenda.
Correct, agenda item number 7.
7. Oh, wait. This is approval.
Okay, thank you.
And Chair, I had a
Jennifer?
comment as it relates to the availability of public comment this morning. I heard from a constituent this morning that they attempted to register online to speak at today's meeting, but the website was down. And there's a concern about the public being excluded from this meeting because the county's website was not taking those requests.
Staff
I
is
see
presently,
we do have numerous, like 8 attendees according to my computer here. So I'm not sure if they're able to get on now or not, but perhaps staff can address that.
we can ask our informational services department to inquire if there are any outages presently. And we'll respond as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you, Jesse. Does that answer your question, Commissioner Purnell?
It does. And would there be a way for someone to still participate this morning if they had indeed attempted to sign up for public comment, but were not able to? Because
Through the chair, without further specifics as to their limitations or their ability to connect, I'm not sure how best to respond. I would encourage them, Chair Purnell, to contact the PBS or email the PBS Commission's address to provide additional information, and we can try and address their problem.
thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the director or comments?
I had one, Commissioner Wiedemann. Yesterday, I actually tried to call the planning department by phone with the planning number, and I got nowhere. What I got, I was checking in on, because I was reading some people having a hard time connecting. So what I got was the phone. There was a recording. It blipped you to, if you wanted to talk to a planner, and then there was no room to leave a message, and it didn't blip you to any planner. On the other hand, then you go to the operator, it did the same thing. We're full, and then it disconnected. So just in case you don't know, that's taking place on your phone.
So
That was yesterday.
so basically people are calling in and it's kicking them off.
Presently, we're experiencing, if I may, through the chair.
Oops, yes, go ahead, Jesse.
Commissioner Wiedemann, presently we are experiencing a high call volume. Our voicemail inbox has a limitation of 50. I noted that this morning for our administrative support staff to clear that queue of voicemails. We're presently processing them as quickly as possible, and thank you for bringing this to our attention.
Right, so therefore, maybe we need another staff member answering the phone rather than just getting blipped to a phone messaging system. If that's what's happening right now. I'm not trying to burden anybody, I'm just informing. It's hard to get in, if you wanted to deal with some issues, it's hard to get to them, to somebody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, it appears there are no other questions or comments from directors, so we'll go on to agenda item number 4, matters from the public. The Planning Commission welcomes participation in commission meetings. This item is limited to matters under the jurisdiction of the commission that are not on the posted agenda and items which will not have already been considered by the commission. No action will be taken. Individuals wishing to address the commission under public expression are welcome to do so via telecomment or email in lieu of personal attendance. Email should be sent to pbscommissions@mendocinocounty.org. All correspondence received will be made available on the Planning Commission agenda page. To submit public comments via telecomment, a request must have been received by 7 a.m. this morning. Do we have any requests for telecomment under public expression?
I do not have any telecomments for public expression.
Thank you, Jim. Then we'll go on to the consent calendar, item 5, of which there is nothing. So on to agenda item number 6A, the regular calendar, case OA underscore 2020-0001, GP underscore 2020-001 workshop. So at this point, do we open the public? On my agenda, it says open the public workshop. Do we do that first? Perhaps, is that, am I correct on that?
You are correct, Chair Ogle.
Okay, thank you. Then we'll go ahead. Has the commission and, let's see, the commissioner staff will note correspondence and telephone comments received. I believe we, as commissioners, have received about 4 different items, if I'm not mistaken. Was there anything else?
Chair Ogle, at this stage, no, there were no other received comments. Those comments that were received were posted to the public hearings page.
Okay, thank you. Then we'll go on to the staff presentation.
Correct. For the staff presentation, Chair Ogle, we defer to our planner assigned to this ordinance amendment, Mr. Sam Vandy Vandewater.
Good morning, Chair Ogle and Commissioners. This is Sam Vandy Vandewater, Planner 2 with Planning and Building Services. I'm going to share my screen, which has the presentation I will be giving on the ordinance. And let me just, can everyone see that? Okay. So today I'll be going over the what is currently proposed as the Oak Tree and Oak Woodland Protection Ordinance. Why won't you move forward? Okay. So just to provide a quick overview of how I will go through this presentation, I will provide an overview in the goals of the workshop. We'll go over really briefly the contents of the ordinance. I'll put a bit more focus on both the oak woodland removal permit and its process, as well as the oak tree removal permit and its process. I will also go over exemptions for the ordinance, as well as enforcement briefly. So this ordinance really arose during the cannabis cultivation ordinance discussion as direction to planning and building staff during the adoption of the cannabis cultivation ordinance. So the Oak Woodlands ordinance is intended to be presented and adopted prior to the start of new cultivation activities. Previously, this was referred to as phase 3 of the cannabis cultivation program, but is now what will be the new chapter in Title 22 of the County Code. The Oak Woodland Ordinance is intended to protect the oak woodlands throughout the county and the inland portion only, so this would not apply to the coastal zone, which is Division 2 of Title 20, or the town of Mendocino, which is Division 3 of Title 20. So this would only apply to Division 1. So for the goals of the workshop, today it's not to take action on the proposed ordinance, but to provide comments and feedback to staff in preparation for the future meeting. So we're really seeking comments on the ordinance from the commission, as well as any areas of concern that the commission has on the ordinance that they would like addressed before we bring the ordinance back, and just direction to staff on proceeding forward. And depending on how this workshop goes, we do currently have the project scheduled for the December 17th Planning Commission hearing. And again, that really depends on the discussion today and the necessary amendments that come out of this workshop. So to go over the ordinance, just an outline of the various sections within the ordinance. You have the intent and applicability, which are very standard for most of our chapter sections. We will also have a definitions, which currently I believe has 26 definitions in it, all pertaining to this chapter. I will note that there are definitions used in the general Division 1 zoning code that have been, terminology that has been applied to this chapter, but is defined in the very beginning of the zoning code and not specifically in this chapter. The next section is the actual prohibition of oak resource impacts and removal. The following sections outline how the permitting requirements are for oak woodland removal as well as oak tree removal. Then the ordinance provides exemptions for certain activities and zoning, as well as penalties and violations should those occur without the benefit of a permit to remove oak, woodland, or oak trees. So just some terms that I want to cover real quick that you'll see throughout this presentation. We have the term native oak tree, which is just any native oak species smaller than what is defined as an individual native oak tree. We have individual native oak trees, which are, there's a table within the ordinance that describes certain sizes of various species of native oak tree. So depending on those sizes would determine if the tree is a native oak tree or an individual native oak tree. And then beyond that, we have heritage oak trees, which are really, the kind of the really big old oak trees. And those, again, are based on size depending on species. And those are always going to be bigger than the individual native oak trees. And lastly, the term oak woodland refers to an oak stand with greater than 10% canopy cover over at least a quarter an acre, if not bigger. And these definitions are a bit more broad in the actual ordinance. I'm just providing just a quick reference to what each of these terms are. So when we see them in the presentation, you have some ideas to what I'm referring to. And please feel free to stop me and ask me to clarify again the terminology if needed. So I'd just like to present the very general section that provides the straight up prohibition of impacts to oak resources. So I'll just read it really quickly. With the exception of activities listed in section 20.248.045 exemptions, no person or entity shall remove or otherwise impact oak resources located within the unincorporated inland areas of the county of Mendocino without adhering to the requirements of this chapter and the issuance of a permit. This prohibition only applies to shrub oaks when within 50 feet of a native oak tree. Furthermore, no replacement trees that are part of mitigation for an oak tree removal permit or an oak woodland removal permit shall be impacted until the DBH, which stands for diameter at breast height, which is roughly 4.5 feet, is established in section 20.248.025 for individual native oak trees has been reached by said trees, unless as part of an oak tree removal technical report or an oak woodland removal management plan for the purposes of thinning replacement trees. Additionally, no building shall occur within 25 feet of the drip line of any oak tree. So the next section of the ordinance outlines the oak woodland removal process.
Vandy, before you get too far, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Greg Nelson here. Otherwise, can you go back to the previous screen? Otherwise impact oak resources. So we have a venue with oak trees and we need to prune those from time to time. Is that considered an impact?
No.
All right.
Maintenance, and that can be clarified if that's direction from the Planning Commission. I realize I have received comments regarding whether maintenance is considered impact, and it is not. So that can be clarified within the ordinance if directed by the commission.
Thank you.
Yeah. So then going back. So the oak woodland removal process entails quite a few steps. Initially, you will apply, or the applicant would apply with a minor use permit, which is a permit, as you know, already established within our county code. And included with that permit, they would need to submit an oak woodland management plan, which I will discuss briefly in the next slide, as well as the standard site plan that kind of outlines their parcel, as well as the existing development and what would be happening. There are also limitations on how much can be removed from an oak woodland, so that we don't want to remove an entire oak woodland under one permit. So there are limitations to how much can be removed. There are the replacement standards. So when a oak woodland management plan is established and written up, there is a minimum number of trees that will be required to replace those that have been removed through the permit. There are findings for approval, which would, once the use permit would go through its hearing body, it would get its initial approval, and then the findings are required to actually make that approval from the hearing body. So I will go over those briefly in a few slides as well. Once the permit is approved, there is a monitoring period in which the trees need to be monitored to ensure their success. And then the final clearance of the permit, which would really be finaling everything, is that all the goals and objectives of the oak woodland management plan have been adhered, and all the oak trees are meeting the standards outlined in this ordinance. And if those are all met, then the final clearance can be provided. So just to go over what would be entailed in creating an oak woodland management plan when an applicant would apply. This includes a site location. It includes a quantification of the existing woodlands, and this would be completed if the woodland is entirely on site. Then the qualified professional would be able to quantify that entire woodland. However, if the woodland is across various parcels under various ownerships, the qualified professional would quantify what's existing on the subject parcel, doing field research, and then any additional woodland off the subject parcel would have to go through, satellite or any other method to quantify what woodland exists as a whole. The applicant would also need to provide the purpose of removal. So if this is to build a house, that would be the purpose. If it's to build a driveway, so it's just really why is the oak woodland being impacted? Then the report would also provide an objective of the management plan. So this would include how much is going to be removed and by what method. The management plan would also include the impacts of these removals of oak woodland. Would it impact habitat? Would it impact nesting seasons for birds? Would it impact soil erosion? What are the overall impacts of the removal of this portion of woodland? We are also requesting mapping, so this would include what's existing as well as the proposed removal, and additionally the proposed replacement. And lastly, the management plan will provide environmentally sensitive alternatives. Just an example, if there is another portion of a parcel in which construction can occur, this would be the preferred environmentally sensitive alternative because no oak woodlands would be impacted by this alternative. So to discuss limitations regarding oak woodland removal, no more than 5% on a single parcel, if that woodland occurs on a single parcel, could be removed. And then no more than, if the woodland is on multiple parcels, no more than 1% for each parcel. But a total of up to 5% could be granted with the permission from other owners who would have to give up their 1%. So, for example, if you had 10 parcels, each parcel, an oak woodland spreads across those 10 parcels, each parcel owner would get 1%. So ultimately, in a situation like that, an oak woodland could decrease by as much as 10%. The replacement ratio is currently 16:1, can be reduced. And the reason this number is so high is because the success of oaks is not guaranteed 100%. And we felt that if it was a lower ratio, for example, 2:1, that the likelihood of oak trees failing and the applicant continually having to return and make sure that at least one oak tree is surviving, it's a greater chance that their permit will have to be extended, because part of the final clearance is that there's a survival rate of 60% after 10 years. So if you only use 2 replacement trees, if one of them dies after 10 years, then you're already going to have to continue your process until you ensure the 60% survival. So that is the reasoning behind the high replacement ratio. And I will say that, as previously mentioned, that if a management plan includes thinning of trees, that those trees can be removed if part of the plan. So that's not to say that if you remove one tree from an oak woodland, that after 10 years you'll have 16 new trees. It's just for the purpose of replanting and ensuring that oak trees are able to succeed after the impact, that there is at least one tree being replaced. So yeah. And as stated, the monitoring period is no less than 10 years. This can be extended by a period of 5 years if the final clearance standards are not met. So to switch over to oak tree
Andy,
removal.
Greg Nelson again. You mentioned 10 years. I thought there was a 20-year process.
That is only for applications that are the result of a violation. So if you do not go through this oak woodland removal permit process before removing oak woodland, then you are subject to an after the fact permit. It's the same process, however, there's a bit more stringent requirements, such as the 20 years instead of 10. And this is because it was in fact a violation. So we want to further ensure that the replacement of those trees actually occurs.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the oak tree removal process is very similar, although it's less intensive in terms of what's required and the cost. And I apologize, let me just return back to the oak woodland removal process. So just to provide an example, if a person owns a 10-acre rural residential parcel, and entirely on that parcel is a 5-acre oak woodland, and the applicant wants to remove, for example, 2,100 square feet of the oak woodland, the applicant would pay a $3,900. Well, currently the cost of a minor use permit is $3,925. So they would pay this one fee for the application to remove the 2,100 square feet of woodland, and this fee would not change depending on the size of the woodland proposed to be removed. So out of 5 acres, 5% would be 10,000 square feet. So there would be no difference in cost between removing 10,000 square feet of oak woodland and 2,100 square feet of oak woodland, should they go through the process before, or using this the permitting process. And then going to oak tree removal, the current cost of an administrative permit, which is what would be required to remove a single or up to 5 individual native oak trees, the current cost is $1,121. Excuse me. So that would mean if you wanted to do your entire allowance, you could remove, I believe, up to 5 individual native oak trees for the cost of $1,121.
Does that have a parcel size on it? On that particular, when you're saying they could remove 5 trees, are you still referring to your previous example of the 5-acre piece?
No. Well, I mean, it would apply. I mean, so if you had that 10-acre parcel in rural residential and you had 5 individual native oak trees that were not part of a woodland, that is correct. You could remove those 5 trees at the cost of $1,121.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. So as I said, the oak tree removal process is similar. You know, you have your application, which includes the administrative permit, an oak tree removal technical report, and the standard site plan. And additionally, there are also limitations, replacement standards, findings for approval, monitoring, and final clearance standards. So the oak tree removal process, the technical report is a bit simpler because you're not impacting an entire oak woodland ecosystem. It's individual trees which still have biological value, but because it's less of an area being impacted, we felt that the administrative permit would be fine and that a reduction in the reporting of what's happening doesn't need to be as intense. So for a technical report, you need the site location, the objectives of removal, which would include verification that is not part of a woodland, as well as the reason for removal. There'll be the impacts of removal. Again, this is referring to habitat, soil erosion, issues such as that. We'll also be mapping an environmentally sensitive alternatives. For example, if you have, again, the 10-acre parcel and you want to build a house, and you want to remove this tree to build a house, we're just trying to provide alternatives so that if that's the only tree on the entire 10 acres, it would be reasonable to just shift your development to an area not occupied by the one tree.
Vandy, I have a question, Commissioner Wiedemann here.
Yeah.
If one chooses to do this process, the administrative process, right, for $1,000 and something, and specifically remove, 1 to a few trees, right? What is the timeline that if that property sells, what happens to the next property owner if they come forward? Can they come back to you for another administrative permit to remove a few more trees?
Well, so I apologize, I don't know why the slide's not here. I was going to go over monitoring and replacement, but so the limitation on individual or tree removal, sorry, let me pull it up on my ordinance on the side. So for limitations, it's 5 individual native oak trees or 1 heritage oak tree within the period of 3 years. So if someone were to sell their property and had just completed a 5 individual native oak tree removal, the new owners would just have to wait a period of 3 years to do an additional 5 trees.
This is Randy Jacobson. I've got a question. If an individual owned a 3-acre parcel and wanted to put a swimming pool in, and he wanted to remove the oak tree, but that one oak tree was part of what is described as an oak woodland, would he be required to go through the oak woodland process, or removal of an oak woodland process?
Yes. So the oak tree removal process is only applicable to oak trees that are not part of an oak woodland. So even if it's an oak woodland and you're trying to remove 1 tree out of that woodland, you would be going through the oak woodland removal process and not the oak tree removal process. So it's very depending on whether or not the area that's in question is a oak woodland or if it's not an oak woodland.
And Vandy, this is Allison Purnell. Who makes that determination about whether this is an individual oak tree, a heritage oak, or it is in fact a part of an oak woodland? Because it seems like that determination needs to be made prior to permit application.
Sure. So at least for the individuals, there is a table that I did not present in this PowerPoint, but it is included in the ordinance, which establishes diameter breast height sizes for both individual native oak trees and heritage. So if you're just trying to determine if it's an individual or a heritage, you would use this table. But to determine if it's part of a woodland or not, I will say that the definition I provided on this PowerPoint was quite brief for the sake of time. But if you examine the definition in the actual ordinance, there is quite a specific set of standards that requires it to be an oak woodland. So if you give me a minute, I can scroll to it. So an oak, would you like me to read the full oak woodland definition? Or
I think maybe at some point we should, but I think more to the point of what I'm curious about is it the applicant that's initially making that determination? Because we do start very quickly getting into these more scientific definitions. And I'm just wondering if that burden is solely on the applicant or if the applicant is working in consultation with planning staff, because because of the intricacies of the definitions of these oak woodlands and the different species, I can just see that there's potential for like applying for the wrong permit type. And so I'm just wondering where that initial burden lies of making that determination.
sure. So that would be, I mean, if the applicant is able to make that determination, or at least make a preliminary determination and come to the county with their determination, they're more than welcome to do that. But this would probably occur during, for example, a building permit process. Planners are responsible for ensuring that building permits are adhering to all the county codes and any restrictions, for example, that have been set on a for example, subdivision maps that are recorded can oftentimes have conditions on them. So when we're conducting building permit reviews, we're examining past subdivisions to ensure certain requirements that may have been adopted as part of that subdivision are being adhered. So this oak woodland and oak tree determination would just be incorporated, for example, into the building permit process. So even if an applicant is unaware of the oak tree and oak woodland protection ordinance, it's really the responsibility of the planners doing their projects to ensure that they're not permitting a building within an oak woodland or allowing an oak tree to be removed without the proper permitting process.
Great, thank you for that. And would that also be the same for cannabis permits?
I believe yes,
Having the
but
staff oversight.
I believe yes. I mean, that's currently what happens now. The cannabis cultivation ordinance already prohibits the removal of oak trees and I believe any commercial tree species as well. So that's really a process that, and I know we have certain projects that, you know, unfortunately the applicants have removed trees, so those are currently being dealt with in our department, but it is the planners who are making those determinations, looking at historical imagery and just verifying that none of the cultivation or associated infrastructure has removed trees to obtain their permit.
Vandy, Commissioner Weidman, I want on the back of that question by Commissioner, by Allison, the question I have is, so an applicant comes in for the oak tree removal process, right? And
Sure.
You do a site visit as a planning part of their permit, even if they're applying for a building permit. You do a site visit. Would you have the capability of requesting during that permit process before they get an okay to go forward to bring on a qualified professional such as a biologist or a forester once you visit the site?
So let me just make sure I understand your question. So if someone applies for an oak woodland removal permit and I go do my site visit, am I required to tell them they need to get a qualified professional?
Yeah, it's the oak tree, right? It's you're coming in, you don't think you have a whole heritage or and you don't have a whole woodlands, but you have some oak trees and you're coming in because you want to build a house or whatever.
Right.
You want to remove a couple of those trees. Is it in that process, that permit process, once somebody initiates the permit with the fee, would you then, during a review, say, wait a minute, we think you need to bring in a qualified biologist to make sure what you want to do is, works with the intent of the tree removal process?
So to even begin the process, as previously mentioned, they'll have to submit either the management plan for oak woodland removal or a technical report for an oak tree removal. And those reports can only be written and prepared by what we have defined as a qualified professional. And for us, in our definitions, a qualified professional is either an arborist, a qualified wildlife biologist, a botanist, or a registered professional forester. So any of those qualified professionals can prepare a plan, but it would be required that a qualified professional prepare either the management plan or the technical report.
Okay, so you're for an admin, the less expensive application, right? Removing one or two, small acreage, whatever. You're saying before they even begin, they need to have a report done, a study done.
If they're going to apply for the permit, yes.
Okay, so both permits, both styles require a report.
Correct. To provide a similar example, if you're applying for a CDP in the coastal zone, oftentimes, as I'm sure you know, we require a biological survey. So it's just kind of a similar situation where instead of a CDP gets a use permit and instead of a biological survey, it's a technical report.
Okay. Thank you, Bandy. That was a little unclear in the less expensive application. Okay.
Thank you. If I can, I have, I think, only like a few more slides left. If I can just finish the presentation and then we can proceed with questions. Moving on towards exemptions, there are going to be exemptions provided for various reasons. Currently, with regard to zoning districts, I have exemptions for single-family residential, two-family residential, and multifamily residential, which is the R1, R2, and R3 zoning, as well as the suburban residential. It should be noted that for these exemptions to apply for these zoning districts, that the parcels must be less than 1 acre in size and they can't be subdividable any further. Additionally, we are not requiring this ordinance be applicable to developed C1 and C2 parcels or any of the industrial parcels if they're developed. However, for example, if you have a commercial parcel that you're subdividing and one half of that subdivision is a developed end and the other half is undeveloped, that undeveloped portion of the commercial zoning would fall under this ordinance. And that applies for industrial as well. If a subdivision creates an undeveloped industrial parcel, then that industrial parcel will have to go through this process. And lastly, we are also exempting any ag designation that currently exists, regardless of any of parcel size. So as long as at the time of adoption of this ordinance, if your parcel was in ag zoning, this chapter would not apply, with the exception of heritage oak trees. And again, heritage oak trees are really just those really old, large oak trees. So woodlands would not be covered under this exemption, and the smaller oak trees would not be covered under this exemption. And the reason for this heritage oak tree is that a lot of our ag lands have heritage valley oaks, and valley oaks are probably one of the most threatened oaks in this county because of their location on valley floors, which are obviously very desirable for development. So that is the reason why we excluded heritage oak trees, to kind of preserve the remaining valley oaks that are still there. So moving on, the additional exemptions include the establishment of a primary residence. And that includes defensible space when establishing that residence. We also have defensible space for existing structures, but any new structures that came in would have to, if they're going to be impacting an oak resource, not only is the structure going to have to be considered, but the 100-foot defensible space for that structure would also be considered in the permit process. Utility line maintenance and county road projects and maintenance would also be exempt from this. This is just to ensure, CAL FIRE does not need to come to get a permit from us every time they need to clear power lines to ensure fire safety. Emergency operations are also exempt. So this would be in the event of a flood or a landslide. We would not require any permitting if oak trees needed to be removed to ensure the emergency operations could occur. Currently, we have all timber activities pursuant to the Forest Practice Act is exempt from this ordinance. And that would include anything that has a timber harvest plan. And so that really applies a lot to our TPZ zoning and our forest land zoning. However, excuse me. However, we did not want to exempt those zoning districts specifically because there are lots of privately owned TPZ and forest land parcels that are not, the owners are not the ones conducting the timber harvest plan. So we didn't want to exempt those two zoning districts for that purpose. Dead, dying, or diseased trees are also exempt from the process, provided that a qualified professional can demonstrate that they are in fact dead, dying, or diseased, and that there's a high potential of failure to injure persons or property. So if you have a dead tree that's near your house and it's likely to come down, then that is going to be exempt from this process. However, if you have a 100-acre parcel and there's a dead tree far out into into the wilderness where no people are really there, no buildings are there, we don't want those removed because dead oak trees actually provide a lot of habitat and uses for ecosystems, despite not being alive and everything. It still controls erosion. There's actually a lot of organisms and animals that rely on dead oak trees for habitats as well. And lastly, the personal use of non-commercial firewood would also be exempt from this. It should be noted, and this is something that I think the Planning Commission should discuss, is that we currently, while these exemptions do occur, we would require applicants to submit a form to us that's indicating that they are impacting these oak woodlands, as well as a statement from a qualified professional that the oak trees that are being removed are not currently suffering from sudden oak death, which is a bacterial disease that oak trees can get, and it's currently rampaging along the coastal oaks of California. So we really want to make sure that when these trees are removed, that they're not spreading sudden oak death, which is very easily spreadable even when trees are dead or removed. And then lastly, with regards to the ordinance, there's the penalties and the violations. So if you're to remove or impact oak resources in any way before getting your permits, you would be required to get an after-the-fact permit and pay additional fines. So, for example, you have the native oak trees, which would be the cost, the oak tree removal permit cost, which is the 1,100 plus 500 for each additional tree. For individual native oak trees, it's 2 times the oak tree removal permit, so that's roughly 2,500 plus 1,000 for each additional tree. If you remove a heritage oak tree, it's about 2,500 for each tree removed. And then for woodlands, it's 2 times the oak woodland removal permit cost per 500 square feet of canopy removed. And just to provide a quick a scenario for the woodlands, if we return back to that 10-acre parcel in rural residential, and a person clears the 2,000 square feet of their oak woodland, instead of that $3,900 price tag for just coming in before doing it, the applicant would be paying roughly $31,000 for having removed 2,000 square feet of oak woodland without the benefit of a permit. So it does increase substantially the more oak woodland is removed. So that is most of the content of the ordinance. One recommendation that I really strongly recommend that the Planning Commission move forward with is that, this kind of ordinance, it's not something that can be adopted and just will fly without needing modifications in the future. It's difficult to create an ordinance like this without testing to see how the ordinance actually, applies to the planning department and applies to the county. So we are recommending that, along with a recommendation of approval to the Board of Supervisors, that there be a condition or a caveat that the ordinance be adopted for a period of 3 years or any time that the commission feels appropriate, and then have the ordinance returned to the Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors for possible direction and amendments. And this is an approach Napa County took. They adopted their oak tree and woodland protection, and then it was brought back to people and the Board of Supervisors for revisions, and it allowed them the 3 years to kind of determine what were the successes and what were the failures of the ordinance. So that's something that I am strongly recommending that the Planning Commission consider when making their recommendation to the Board of Supervisors. And so lastly, if you guys have questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. And then I don't know if you guys want to discuss among yourselves. But then regarding public comment, I'll let Jim go through that, and I'll help by to ensure timeliness. I'll provide the 3 minutes. So for anyone who will be providing public comment, you will have 3 minutes to talk, and I will say 30 seconds when there's 30 seconds remaining, and then I will say time when your time is complete, and Jim will move on to the next person. And then after all people have commented, if the chair would like to bring any of those commenters back for further discussion, the chair may do so. So at this point, if there's any questions from the commissioners, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Question, this is Randy, Commissioner Jacobson. I'm just curious, what brought this on, this ordinance? And what are we trying to do? I know we're trying to protect oak and oak woodlands, but from what I gather, this was brought on by the cannabis cultivation or process. So can we go over a little bit? I mean, has there been in the past has this been a real issue here in Mendocino County? And are we doing this as the cannabis process?
Sure. So the ordinance, when we adopted the cannabis cultivation ordinance back in 2017 at this point, there was certain direction given to staff there was certain direction to staff included with that adoption, one of which was this ordinance, an ordinance to protect the oak woodland. And that really arose out of conversations during the public comment period of the cannabis cultivation ordinance. There was a large concern that people would be coming to this county to do cannabis cultivation and in the process removing a lot of woodlands. Additionally, I think it's not only a concern about development, but a desire to protect what we currently have. Numerous individuals from the kind of the environmental side who are familiar with oak woodlands can tell you that Mendocino County is kind of, we have some of the most, if not the most unfragmented oak woodland habitat in the entire state of California. I mean, I myself am quite an avid traveler, and I would agree that out of all the oak woodlands in the state, you know, Mendocinos are really pristine and undeveloped. And I mean, from my travels, the only other place I can think of that even has similar pristine oak woodlands is maybe Lake County. But so it's not only a desire, or it's not only to prevent future development from impacting the oak woodlands, but a desire to protect what we still have.
So, Vandy, I have a question, Commissioner Nelson here.
Yes.
If a person is getting a building permit and it requires some tree removal, do they have to pay both fees?
Yes, they would. And that is, I mean, that's what would occur. For example, if someone was required a building permit to build a commercial structure and they needed a use permit to use that commercial structure, the applicant is still paying both the building permit and the use permit fee. And so that's a standard practice within our office. We don't reduce the building permit fee from what the use permit cost was.
So another question I had was, I'm not clear what a scrub oak is. Is it a particular variety, or, you know, how is it defined?
So we do define it in our chapter. I just didn't bring it up because it only applies when it's in relation to an oak woodland. But a shrub oak is any native oak shrub species of Quercus that includes Oregon white oak, huckleberry oak, scrub oak, and leather oak. So if any of those species are occurring within a oak woodland, they are also protected by this ordinance. But for example, if you were to find a scrub oak just by itself in the middle of a field without any oak woodland near it, it would not be protected by this ordinance.
Thank you. So as far as the exemption for ag in the literature we received, it mentions ag 40, but you said any agriculture designation is exempt. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, the ag 40 is just a designation that's in our zoning code. We have plenty of parcels that are ag 40, but are not that are smaller than the 40 acres. So that 40 is not indicating what the parcel itself is. That's just a part of the zoning district designation. But anything that is so, for example, we can have an ag 40 parcel that's 2 acres. It's still ag 40. It's just not what's the word I want to use? It's not conforming to the minimum parcel acreage size. But it still has that ag 40 zoning, so it would be exempt.
So would that include rangeland?
No.
So rangeland is not exempt?
No. And that's because a majority of our oak woodlands are in rangeland.
Thank you. So if nobody else has a question, I have two letters. I guess there are more, but the two I have are from North Bay Realtors and the Farm Bureau. Are we going to go through those item by item?
I would support
I'm
going
not
through
sure.
those item by item, maybe in the public comment section, but I do have a couple more questions for Vandy. On page 4 in the table, Vandy, which also goes on to page 5, in
Yes.
column 3, it's not labeled column 3, but column 3 and also column 5, I presume that's DBH.
So are you referring to column 3 and 5 not having titles on the second page?
On the first page, it's just titled capable soil, individual native, and then column 5, capable heritage. And I'm wondering if DBH should be in there because I believe that's the reference, correct?
Correct. So yes, we can add DB. That is referring to DBH, and that can be included in the tables for clarification.
Okay, so then I'm looking at column 3 then, where we're looking at DBH, which is, looks like it's under, well, collectively anything under 20 inches. And so we're seeing individual oak trees there that would be protected as small as 6 inches DBH for the interior live oak. And then I'm comparing that to the firewood exemption, which says that 3 trees can be removed per year per parcel up to 15 inches DBH. And I'm just wondering about, cumulative impact there, and if we might think about reducing that DBH on the firewood. I mean, I myself am a huge fan of oak firewood. But I think cumulatively over the years, if you're taking up to 15 inches, 3 trees per parcel on any year, that might really add up and be contrary to the intent of this ordinance, draft ordinance.
I understand the reservation. There have been public comments, though, indicating that the 15 DBH is not enough firewood for a full year. So I guess for myself, I guess this would be a good discussion amongst commissioners, because this number really, it depends on, I guess, who it is and how much firewood is required. So like I said, there's already been a number of people who say 15 is not enough. And then I have gotten the other side where 15 is too much.
And I'm assuming that, I'm assuming stormfall is exempt.
What, I mean, like trees that are knocked over during like storm events?
Yeah, because some of these big oaks, I mean, on my property, huge oaks come down every year. And it's more firewood than we can use for multiple households just from a single tree in a year. And that's nothing that was taken by humans. That was just nature at work. And so I guess I would argue that with stormfall, there could potentially be plenty of oak as well as non-oak available for personal use firewood.
Well, if that's something the Planning Commission would like clarified in this ordinance, I can certainly do that with direction.
So, Vandy, on the same question, I'm not clear. It's cumulative of 15 inches. So is that 15 inches for each tree? Or if you cut 3 trees, is it 5 inches for each tree?
It's the latter of what you said. So it's cumulative, not per tree. So you could take 1 tree that's 15 DBH, or you could take 3 that are 5 DBH. But ultimately, it's the 15 that's the limit for that year.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. That actually makes a difference for me. I thought it was 3 at 15 inches.
No, it would be up to 3. So if it was 3, it would be 5 each, and if it was 2, it could be 7.5 each, or if it's 1, it's 15.
I have less concern about that then. And then I'm also wondering if we might want to add in there that stormfall is exempt, stormfall and wood.
Vandy, I have another question here. Would phase 1 or phase 3 cultivators be eligible for a oak tree woodland removal permit to develop or expand a cultivation area?
I do not believe so because the cannabis, well, it depends, I guess, on, we're currently writing the new chapter for Title 22, which would be the replacement for phase 3. So I guess it would really depend on the language of that new chapter, whether or not applicants could remove oak trees. If we are going based off of the original cannabis cultivation program and it's the phase 2 and 3 in there, and we bring that similar language over, then no, they wouldn't be able to because the cannabis cultivation ordinance itself is what's prohibiting oak tree removal, not this ordinance.
I guess my question then is a big part of why we're doing this was to protect oaks and oak woodlands from cannabis cultivation.
It's to protect from any development, and as including outside of, I mean, I guess it's more to protect for development that's not related to cannabis cultivation, since oak trees are already protected by the cannabis cultivation ordinance. This pertains to any other type of development.
Okay, because I mean, the background on this project states that it was brought up due to the, as part of the cannabis cultivation process, but it doesn't sound like that's actually what's happening.
Well, no, so I understand the confusion. It wasn't adopted, or the direction for this ordinance was not provided in tangent with the cannabis cultivation ordinance, as in this ordinance is not supposed to be in alignment with that. This ordinance is separate, and it came during the same conversations as the cannabis cultivation ordinance. It's not a mitigation measure, it's just an additional direction given to our staff to establish an oak woodlands ordinance for the county, just for development in general.
We actually state that we cannot move on to phase 3 unless there's an oak ordinance approved by the board of supervisors. So
that's direction, though. That's not a mitigation measure in our adopted MND or anything. That's just direction from the board. So they wanted to see this ordinance prior to phase 3.
Right.
that sounds like a mitigation to me, but anyway, all right.
I might add a little historical perspective, both when we were working on the general plan, new general plan, and the UVAP, an oak woodland ordinance was brought up, and
Right.
I may be wrong, but I think it might be in comment. There might be comments about it in the general plan.
Vandy, Marilyn, over to you.
Vandy.
Sorry.
Okay, it's Commissioner Purnell here. I have a question for you, and maybe you can draw on some of the conversations that you've had with CDFW and some maybe Native Plant Society. On page 3 at the bottom, it's talking about replacement trees, and that stock for replacement trees shall be sourced from Mendocino from an elevation of no greater than 500 feet plus or minus deviation from the project site, and that it does need to be certified free of sudden oak death. So I understand completely why that requirement would be there. It sounds very ideal, and I would love for that to work. My question is, do we have local nurseries? Do we have adequate local nurseries that in Mendocino County that are within 500 feet plus or minus of any sites likely to impact oak resources? Like, can we really meet that requirement in Mendocino County?
So that requirement came out of discussions with, CDFW, California Native Plant Society, Cape Marion Child, Willits Environmental Center. We did have a few meetings with those groups. And so that requirement really came out of discussions with them. From my understanding, the success of an oak tree, like sapling or seedling, succeeds much better when the seed itself is sourced from an elevation of no greater than the 500 square feet, or sorry, the 500 feet in elevation. So, and from my understanding, you can collect a lot of these acorns just in the fall season. So perhaps prior to the removal of these trees, the seeds or the acorns from these oaks can be collected and then used for the replacement trees. But as to whether or not there are nurseries with availability, I assume that there's not a nursery at all these various elevations. So no, I would say that the nurseries are a bit limited on that end.
But it's the seeds that need to be, right? Not the nursery.
Correct. It's just the acorns need to be sourced from a location no greater than 500 plus or minus feet in elevation.
But the nursery doesn't need to be there.
Correct.
Gotcha.
So I suppose an applicant planning ahead for permitted removal could collect those acorns prior to oak removal and then work with a local nursery to grow those out, because the bottleneck on that seems to be the sudden oak death free certification, which I don't think I could accomplish as like an individual growing out my own acorns, but maybe in concert with the local nursery, they would have the resources to do it. Is that a possibility?
That, as well as the qualified professional who would be writing either the management plan or the technical report, they should be able to as well identify the acorns and collect those. And I will note that previous drafts of this regulation were a little bit simpler and just stated that the acorns needed to be sourced from Mendocino County. So that's something that the commission could discuss, is whether or not they want it just sourced from the county or if they want it sourced elevationally as well.
Great, thank you. I'm glad to see that there's a possible pathway for success there.
Sorry, Chair Ogle, did you?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, first of all, I just want to do some housekeeping. I'm finding that once these ordinances come for my signature, they cannot be changed once the Planning Commission has approved them. And I'm finding, maybe they're minor to other people, but I think that these documents need to be correct. And I've got a couple of just housekeeping cleanup things that I would like to address before we go on. And the first one is on page 12. At the bottom, paragraph A. I believe it should read the permits required by this chapter are in addition, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, thank
Adding
you.
E. Okay. And then, excuse me. The last part of this is a little unclear to me. It doesn't read correctly, I don't think. If a person obtains a permit other than a permit required by this chapter to engage in activity that results in an impact to an ordinance until the permit or permits required by this chapter also can obtained. I don't think that reads properly. I think something needs to be corrected there.
Okay, we will review that language.
And then on page 13, item number 3, B3, sorry. Last sentence, such inventory fee shall also be in addition to any, take out additional AL, remove the AL from addition.
Sorry, what section is this?
B as in boys, paragraph C, begins the Board of Supervisors may impose.
Okay. Oh, I
Last
see it.
sentence. Yeah, okay. And then I did have another question. and I think we're finding this with the whole cannabis ordinance things too. We've got fees, and more fees, and then we have to have a qualified professional. And perhaps Commissioner Jacobson could address this. We're seeing this, I mean, let's be honest, we're seeing this with the cannabis cultivation. We've got charges. It's becoming so expensive. A lot of them are going underground because they don't want to pay for the permits. It's taking a long period of time when they do apply to get a permit. And I'm seeing the same thing with this. I'm seeing additional costs, and I think we're going to see a lot of people go underground and just do it without a permit. And yes, okay, there is monitoring and there's site, but the department cannot be, people in the county, employees cannot be out covering everything, looking for everything. And I'm not sure that this is going to achieve the desired item that on this ordinance that's going to, I see people going underground just like cannabis. I guess that says enough. So that's my concern.
Vanny, this is Randy Jacobson. I don't know if people have any idea what the cost is for a qualified professional to get involved in a project like this, but it's going to be expensive. I mean, it's not like writing a timber harvest plan, but it's definitely like writing a coastal development permit, and those can become extremely expensive. For just like the example I brought up earlier. To have to get a permit to take out one tree because you want to put a swimming pool in and it's adjacent to an woodland seems over the top to me. And to actually, I have Japanese maples on my property, and the seeds from the oak trees fall into the pots and actually germinate in those pots, which I end up pulling out because I'm trying to grow maple trees. But there is a way of testing these acorns. You put them in the water to see if they float, and from that you can determine as to whether they would be viable. But for the general public to have woodland management plan, and then of course the development and monitoring of the replacement trees for 10 years, and that's that's what you would be looking at, just to remove one tree, which may be right on the edge of an oak woodland.
Right, but then that would also, if it's an individual, if you're permitted to remove individual trees, what's stopping a person from removing a woodland by just removing individual trees on a yearly basis?
This is just a project. This would be to a building permit. So it wouldn't be like you would be building a new building every year and then with that taking out an additional tree. I just don't think there's a real drive to remove oak woodlands in this county.
I have a question. Chair Ogle, can I go? Commissioner
Yes,
Wiedemann?
please.
Yes, I had a couple thoughts. Because I am in the coastal zone here and I do a lot of coastal development permits and I deal with a lot of consultants for my clients. And it is expensive and building costs are going through the roofs and clearly permit costs are also being very expensive. So the issue I see in the sense of where we want from a environment, you know, we're more educated around what to protect environmentally. And clearly our, you know, heritage oaks. And if we have some of the last great stands in the rangeland area, can we figure out a way to protect them and whoever owns that land that they're on and give an incentive for the protection rather than having to come in through all the consultants and going through. And I am in support of protecting the heritage oaks. There's that, I get that. But can we frame this ordinance in a way of, if I'm a landowner and I happen to have some of the best stands, can't I get some kind of property, you know, can't I get some kind of value from the county, be it, you know, off my property taxes, you know, because I'm protecting them?
I don't believe through an ordinance you can do that. That's something that would have to go through the Board of Supervisors.
Well, it's something I think we should talk about in the sense of trying to improve the way, because I hear Chair Ogle's thing about more and more people are going underground because they're not wanting to go through the cost or we could call it like the permit processing. I don't always agree with that, but that's a reality and we can't turn our heads. So can we start, and if we have to do something to figure out a way to give a benefit to protect, you have a resource in your backyard. How do you get a benefit to protect it so that it passes on landowner to landowner? Like we did for forest lands, like we did for ag land, you know, tax reductions. Thank you.
I understand the concerns. I would just like to remind the commission that our direction from the Board of Supervisors is for an ordinance. So if you have, I mean, if there's changes you'd like to see to the ordinance and amendments you'd like to see, that's possible, but some of these discussions are beyond what is being asked of the Planning and Building Department and beyond what an ordinance can achieve.
Deputy County Counsel Matthew Godrowski, just to follow up on that, I mean, some of the taxation issues you're talking about also emanate from state law, the Williamson Act and its provisions for ag land, and there are actually ways to do open space contracts. Those have not historically been done in this county, and I believe at one point they were negatively viewed in terms of how that would work on parcels here. That might be something to revisit as part of a larger process, or remind people of that. If they have stands of oak woodlands on their property, maybe that is something to look to. I think a separate comment raised, and I'm not sure how this is working in other counties, is this idea of you know, open space banks, where certain properties will become more protected, and you know that's a much longer process than I think necessarily this ordinance and where we've targeted so far. Today's workshop really is trying to flesh out and bring out these kinds of comments and requests from the commission for staff's consideration. to see if we can bring those forward as part of this ordinance, or if necessary, continue those comments forward to the board to see what else might be possible out there going forward. I want to just make one quick comment in terms of kind of the genesis of where this is coming from. I feel the cannabis ordinance did bring this up because so many cannabis grows were in rangeland. That being said, the current general plan in the resource management, resource element has action item 28.1, which includes several bullet points specifically about oak woodlands and preserving those woodlands. So I think the ordinance is being looked at as one mechanism to implement that action item in the general plan.
I think what we were talking about here, and Diane brought it up, and it's the idea of trying to maybe get a lower tax break if you are willing to protect heritage oaks on your property. It's almost like a conservation easement, and you'd have an easement on the property. And I hate to say, but I'm involved in those, and they're expensive also. So I'm not sure. This is something that people that put conservation easements on their property generally are in a higher tax bracket to start with, or it's just not economically feasible.
If I may, through the chair, I'd also like to note that this is one of the reasons that we're strongly recommending that this go through a 3-year kind of trial period to kind of determine what are the issues with the ordinance, what is working, what isn't working. So I just wanted to bring that up again, that we are hoping that the board would, and the planning commission would recommend to the board that this would be sort of a trial run for the ordinance, whatever ends up getting adopted, because we know there's so many issues and moving pieces to this. I think Jesse has something.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes, go ahead, Jess.
I would like to remind the Planning Commission that we have yet to open public comment, and that we do have a number of public commenters who are online to otherwise speak. I'd also like to respond to some of the initial questions of staff with regards to the potential outages. Staff did speak with Information Services, and we confirmed that there have been no recent or current outages associated with our site. Staff also tested the process to provide telecomment. You will also note that one comment was received and posted to the Planning Commission website. Additionally, that comment was emailed to your attention. At this stage, I would also just like to remind you that public comment has yet to be opened.
Thank you, Jesse. And I do realize that it just seems there are a lot of questions from the commission staff, and I realize that we do need to move on, and perhaps we should. I'm kind of looking at the other commissioners. Are we ready to move on to public comment and then maybe go back, ask questions of staff? How do the other commissioners feel about that? Maybe just a nod of the head or a shake of the head.
I just wouldn't mind a 3-minute break here.
Okay, we'll take a 3-minute break and be back at 10:33.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. hearing.
Deputy County Counsel Matthew Gadrowski, just one quick comment. This is just a public workshop. This isn't not a noticed public hearing per se. And today's item is just to hear out comment and discussion from members of the public and the commission, and then provide direction to staff. There's no actual formal action being adopted today.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Then I guess we will open the public comment period, if I'm wording that correctly. This is the point where we address any telecommenters that have submitted their form and are waiting on the line. The clerk will read the list in order, call the next speaker. When called to speak, please state your name for the record. Public comment is limited to 3 minutes, and staff will be keeping track of the time on that. So please remember 3 minutes only. Speakers are asked to please address their comments to the meeting chair and to refrain from using profanity or engaging in conversation with members of the audience or staff. So I believe we're ready to go with the first telecommenter.
And the first person is Lisa Vandenfort.
She muted.
Hi, Lisa. Star 6 to unmute if you're on a phone.
Good morning. I'm on a phone. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for hosting this workshop and the really thoughtful discussion already this morning. I'm Lisa Badenfort, Public Affairs with North Bay Realtors. This is, as you can tell, an extremely consequential proposal for housing. We would have welcomed some early engagement alongside the other stakeholders, but we're grateful that we're having the conversation now. We place a high value on forest health. I'm the proud daughter of a Mendocino County forester, and Mendocino County is indeed distinct. We are concerned, however, about several areas of the draft. Thank you for receiving our formal comment letter with our inquiries and recommendation. Just to mention a few areas, we do appreciate where residential is excluded in some of this, but it does expose all parcels over 1 acre, plus the ancillary services, so driveways, landscaping, ADUs, rebuilds, food production, and costs can really skyrocket in there. The mitigation ratios are some of the highest we've seen. And I think one of our primary concerns really is that if there isn't an achievable alternative, a land bank, a conservation easement program as is common, how can owners not just kind of on small parcels essentially be unable to improve the property if they can't then host 8 trees, 16, 32, et cetera? Absent an accessible in lieu option, we're not clear what they can do from there. A lot of subjectivity comes with this almost entirely discretionary process, especially when 2 levels of government authority are proposed. There's a lot of areas where it's not just the director with the authority to approve either alternatives or permits or monitoring, but also a state entity. So replacement and monitoring requirements also call for a QP to come to the property, sometimes up to 11 times over the course of a standard project. So these are just a few areas where engagement and policy development could be more thoughtful, and we do support those wisely conveyed by Farm Bureau as well. So we hope for an authentic engagement process moving forward. Thank you for your attention this morning. We do look forward to working with you and with staff moving forward. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ms. Badenfort. And our next telecommenter.
The next telecommenter is Amy Nguyen.
Myself. Okay, great. Thank you for the unmute button. Hi, Planning Commission. It's really great to see you all. Thank you for your thoughtful work, staff and commissioners, through considering this ordinance. I'm Amy Nguyen with Wind Coastal Planning and Biology in Fort Bragg. And I just have some questions. One quick comment. I think this kind of conversation, this element feeds really nicely into the concept of a county multi-species habitat conservation plan that would help address some of these elements, not only for the oak woodlands, but also for other protected species and habitats such as we come across in the coastal zone. Specific questions with regards to replacement trees. I would, I agree with the comments raised earlier by one of the commissioners about, the 500-foot elevation deviation. I would like to see that as a preferable. Some sort of weight saying that the county prefers the 800, the source for the replacement oaks to be within 500 feet. How do I know that I've gotten, how does a neighbor know once they've sold their property that their allotment for removal towards this cumulative woodlands has already been granted to somebody else? That deed restrictions can be quite pricey. They take a long time to go through the review and recording process. So just those three items, and then my last one is also echoing that if the regulations can get, and we see this certainly in the coastal zone often, if regulations get too onerous or
30 seconds.
You get it onerous or expensive, then our goal of no net loss fails, and people risk, they'll perform removals without actually knowing whether they're going to impact something or not, out of fear because something limits their ability to behave, or perhaps removal isn't necessarily warranted. So thank you for receiving my comments. I appreciate the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Ms. Nguyen. And our next telecommenter.
Our next
Richard Seltzer.
And Richard, if you're on the phone, it is *6 to unmute yourself. Richard Seltzer, you are available to speak. If you're on a telephone, it is *6 to unmute yourself.
Perhaps we could go on with the next telecommenter and come back to Richard Seltzer.
Yes, Chair. We can move on to the next. We'll come back to Richard.
Okay, we'll go ahead and go on to the next one, and we'll come back to Richard. Can we have Jeff Cram?
Hello, Jeff. If you're on the phone, please hit *6 to unmute yourself.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you.
Okay. I'm Jeff Cram. I'm a local realtor, and I am also a member of the board of directors for the North Bay Association of Realtors. I'd like to thank you for hosting this workshop. We learned about this draft ordinance just last week, and we have welcomed inclusion. We would have been welcomed to the inclusion of the stakeholders meeting. We understand that the county is eager to move forward with the cannabis program, and that the adoption of this ordinance is a condition of to proceed. However, this is a substantial ordinance with serious implications, and it deserves much more analysis and engagement prior to adoption. Like you, we place a high value on the environmental protection and conservation, and we appreciate areas where residential is included. But including all residential properties over 1 acre in size and annexurally activities would subject homeowners to extreme mitigation ratios with few offsite alternatives. These are just a couple of the areas of concern for the housing and home ownership. The replacement ratio for individual trees and woodlands may be interest stateside, but are uncommon in California. A ratio of 8 to 16 to 1 is the highest we've ever seen implemented. And without a land bank or conservation easement option, then building an ADU, a driveway, or even landscaping could not process unless the homeowners can fit a new forest on their parcel. Please align the mitigation ratio to the neighborhood and neighboring counties at least 3 to 1 with a public project option. What is the impact? How would this affect the housing across the county? How many 1 acre parcels would be impacted? What are the estimate total cost of removing and monitoring 1 tree or a 1/4 acre of woodlands, including hiring a forester or an arborist up to 5 to 11 times during that process? Limit total removal of 5 trees or 5% on a parcel for 3 to 10 years. How could this not effectively prevent people from building or renovating? Please consider what amendments are needed to ensure we don't impose impossible costs on those who live in or try to invest in Mendocino County. We urge you to and are eager to work with the partnership with the county on the next steps. Thank you for consideration, our input and recommendations. And again, thank you for everything you guys do.
Thank you, Mr. Cram. And our next telecommenter, please.
It's going to be Devin Jones.
And then Devin, if you're on the phone, it's simply *6 to unmute yourself.
Good morning, Devin Jones, Executive Director for Mendocino County Farm Bureau.
Good morning, Devin.
Appreciate the opportunity to participate. We will refer the commission to our full comment letters, but I would like to highlight some key points this morning. One, I think there's several definitions that need clarification and addition. Specifically, the definition of impact currently includes the removal of a tree or portions of a tree. And this may not have been the intent, but in reading through this, it seems like the removing portions of an oak tree could be excessively limiting to required pruning, maintenance, fire prevention, all those types of things. So that needs to be considered. The table that is present in the draft in section 20.248.025 isn't clear. I think anybody that's a layman that's reading through this is going to be significantly challenged, especially when it comes to trying to calculate what is going to be the required mitigation based on crown cover, based on DVH. So I think there needs to be some clarification there. In terms of mitigation, I think that comments previous and regarding the excessive mitigation ratios of 16 to 1 or 8 to 1 don't seem to be justified, and I think it's really not going to be possible in all parcels. So we would support previous commenters to say that there needs to be an expanded suite of options available, not just a direct replant mandate. So I think those need to be looked at. And one specific concern that's in there now is that the County of Mendocino is the entity granting the permits, and they should be the sole entity responsible for determining acceptable mitigation. As written now, it states that the County of Mendocino and the California Department of Fish and Game is going to be determining mitigation options. We do not feel that's acceptable. Ms. Nguyen brought up the point earlier that I was trying to bring up in our comment letter regarding the fact that, 10 years or even a 20 years for after the fact permits a long period of time. Properties sell, staff transition. So if I'm going to come in and buy a property that's, within the 8 years of a 10-year time frame, how am I going to be made aware that I am now responsible for the mandates of meeting those mitigation standards? Is there going to be a deed restriction? Is there some sort of notification process? What is that going to look like? Exemptions, we do appreciate that there was some consideration for some of our concerns early on regarding some of the agricultural property,
30 seconds.
Timberland. But we feel that the statements made, there's the two sections in 20.248.040 make it overly restrictive and does not truly allow for consideration of exemption. So we request that you read our full comment letter, and we will continue to participate in this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. And we did receive that, I believe it was 8-page this morning. And I probably all of us, because of the interest and concern in this item, I think all of us probably had the opportunity to at least read it. And I do agree that we should perhaps address some of the items, both from the Board of Realtors as well as the Farm Bureau. Thank you. And I believe, do we still have a telecommenter to come in on the line?
We do.
Asa B. Spade.
Hello, this is Asa Spade. I'm a biologist on the coast. I would be one of the people considered the qualified professional, and I have been doing biological surveys for coastal development permits for about 10 years. I think this would be very similar of a process, and I would like to comment that it can be a very expensive process, and I have seen a number of people give up on the process and leave the coast, especially elderly people that think that they're going to retire here on property that they bought a long time ago, and then find out that the cost of permits and reports weren't factored into their retirement. I think it's also a social justice issue where we limit, wealthy people to being able to live here. I'd like some clarification. Vandy said that there was for the oak woodlands, there was a 16-to-1 mitigation rate, and that was to ensure the success of the reestablishment of at least one tree. Now that makes sense, but the way that it's written, it also says that there needs to be a 60% survival rate, which would require 9.6 of those trees to survive. I think that needs to be clarified what the actual end goal is. Our end goal that if we cut down one tree that we need, 10 trees, or are we trying to achieve that one tree by planting 16 acorns with a hope to, at the end of that 10 years, have that one tree replaced? I did a quick search on the internet for how much wood you get from cutting a tree of various DBH. Many households require several cords of firewood per year for heating. The table I found on the internet shows that to create 1 cord of firewood on the low end, the 5-inch DBH would require 46 to 55 trees to create 1 cord of firewood, and trees of a 16-inch DBH, which are a little bit bigger than the 15-inch maximum size, it would require 2 trees. I'm on the coast and I burn about 4 cords a year. There's no way I would be able to get my own firewood with this permit. It says that the trees must be certified free of sudden oak death. I wonder who does a certification of sudden oak death, what's that process, and who's qualified to make that certification. Let's see, for an exemption for a primary residence, would the owners be allowed to choose any site on their parcel, or would they need to hire a biologist and choose the site that was least impacting? Say they have a 10-acre parcel and there's a spot that's perfectly good for a house.
30 seconds.
Would they need to build outside of the woodland, or could they build in the woodland to prevent them from having to deal with this ordinance in the future? Also, I wonder, is there an exemption permit required? Say you want to cut your 3 firewood trees. Can you just do that, or do you have to go into the county and tell them that you want to cut firewood and get an exemption permit for that? Thank you.
Time.
Thank you, Mr. Spade. And I'm assuming that staff is making notes of all the comments that are made. I think Mr. Spade made a lot of good comments as well. Staff is doing that, is that correct?
That is correct. Staff is recording the comments and questions of the presenters, and we will, to the extent possible, respond to those during the next presentation to the Planning Commission or during the discussion to follow within. Vandy, would you like to add anything?
Thank you, Jess.
Are we not seeing if Richard Seltzer's back?
Yes, that's my next question. If we have any more telecommenters, or if Mr. Seltzer is back.
Yeah.
Presently, we're going to try again for Mr. Seltzer, and then and after that, we do have one additional telecommenter on the line. Mr. Seltzer, if you're on the phone, it is *6 to unmute yourself. Again, if you're on the line, sir, it is *6 to unmute yourself to speak moving forward. Chair, if I may suggest, it does not appear that we have the ability to communicate at this time with Mr. Seltzer. We do have one additional telecommenter if you would like to proceed.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Go ahead, Tess Alvin Smith.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Hi, I'm a registered professional forester retired from CAL FIRE. I was put in charge of many timberland conversions in your county. And so I have a lot of experience with what happens when you remove oaks and trees. I wear many hats. I'm currently a county official, a city official, and I'm on your county climate action advisory committee. So carbon sequestration is one of my issues. Fire prevention is one of my issues. And I put on many oak woodland workshops out of Sacramento myself. So I'm very excited about what we're doing here. There have been no protections for oaks in this county, and actually in this state, maybe 4% of the lands are protected, even though something like 80% of wildlife diversity is on rangelands. There is no protections hardly anywhere. It's considered junk. So this is great. What I wanted to say was one of the issues that is very important is that you note that rangeland soils are extremely shallow, usually over bedrock, and they're very, very, very slippy. And unless they are protected from a harvest plan review, which in the early stages did not include rangeland, but now if they're a part of a vineyard conversion, they would be considered. That's great, but most of the rangeland is not going to be considered. So when trees are removed or cover is removed and changed, you're going to have a lot of erosion. And we do not have an erosion control ordinance in this county, as far as I know. So I wanted to say that this needs to be included in your permit. Impacts of removal needs to specifically ask for that erosion control plan, or at least consideration of that. Secondly, I'd like to say that you're right, there's no nurseries that have oaks. Lou Moran Reforester Center does grow trees for people, but as far as I know, not oaks. Maybe that can be changed. I would like to see a cease and desist when it's discovered that someone has not got a permit but is converting the land for whatever, cannabis or whatever. And it's nice that you have all
30
these.
seconds.
But I'd like to see a cease and desist. And finally, for monitoring the trees, these are not a legislated mandate for Fish and Game or forestry or anybody. Only the county can monitor this unless you have some sort of agreement or financial agreement with these other agencies. So I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you, Alvin Smith. Would we like to try Richard Seltzer again one last time? Staff, are we trying Mr. Seltzer again?
Mr. Seltzer, you are the selected speaker. If you are on the telephone, please hit *6 to unmute yourself. Again, Mr. Seltzer, you are the selected speaker. Madam Chair, we have no response. Would you like to proceed?
Yes, we will go ahead then. We have received, I believe, 4 letters or emails to consider, and I think most of those will be addressed and considered for our next workshop. So at this point, I believe we close the public hearing. Is that correct, County Council?
Deputy County Council Matthew Kudrowski, there is no public hearing to close, so we can leave comment open. And if the commissioners want to go back to any of the commenters as we go forward, that's fine.
Yeah, I apologize. Then I will close the public comment period, and the public comment is no longer permitted. I'm not sure at this point if we go on with discussion between commissioners and staff, or if we go on to our next item. So I guess I need staff's recommendation there.
Of course. So, Chair, you can have a rotation of each commissioner separately as well to allow them to ask their questions and continue discussion at this stage would be advisable. And we're also still able to bring back the public at any time to present questions to those individuals.
Okay, thank you. So we'll go ahead with the commissioner questions or comments. We'll start with Commissioner Holcamp.
Well, I do think that we have to figure out how we're going to get these trees. And so it might, I don't know if it would be in the ordinance, but it does seem to me like we're going to have to provide some resources to people of where they can grow their within 500 feet of altitude acorns out and stuff like that. We do need to add some kind of language to this ordinance about normal tree maintenance is not an impact, and just needs to be somehow clearly delineated. I thought the last commenter's point about a cease and desist if you find out it's going on, and some kind of thing like that. You might get a call from a neighbor saying, my neighbor's taking down a 800-year-old oak. What do we do? And the whole question of monitoring, I thought, came out of this. That do we have some kind of a county-wide system of monitoring this, or is it always going to be qualified professionals at, $250 an hour or something? I think we have to figure out a way to make people want to comply. And I think it should be hard to remove the oak trees, easy to, if you must remove one, that it should be somehow affordable to monitor that for the 10-year period. Those are my issues. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Holcamp. We'll go on to Commissioner Purnell now.
Okay, so I agree that the nurseries issue needs to be revised. Again, I understand about wanting to have success with replacement, but we need that to be physically achievable in Mendocino County. Vandy, I'm wondering if further conversation with CDFW, Native Plant Society, etc., might reveal some kind of workable alternative there, because right now it doesn't seem like that pathway is actually open. I am a huge fan of exploring an in lieu option or offsite alternatives, and I think this is the perfect opportunity for us to revisit the Oak Mitigation Fund. The Oak Mitigation Fund is something that some of you might remember I have been advocating for Mendocino County. Last I checked with staff, we do not have an oak mitigation fund, and we are collecting oak mitigation monies and or requiring applicants to provide those monies to some kind of oak mitigation fund. It is, the county can set one of those up. It's allowable under state law for purposes of education, conservation, and I'm curious as to whether or not an oak mitigation fund might be a way to help finance some of these oak conservation easements, which are expensive to do. But if we're talking about penalty fees being in the tens of thousands of dollars, it seems like there's the potential for, you know, a single penalty to go pretty far towards some of those biological assessments that are required to establish conservation easements. So that is a request to revisit the oak mitigation fund, and it might be that the in lieu options where replacement ratios are not achievable on smaller residential lots, maybe those monies could go into an oak mitigation fund. The third thing that I think needs a little more fleshing out is tracking. Tracking of two things in particular, cumulative loss across parcels, and then secondly, monitoring, whether it's the 10-year monitoring period or the 20-year monitoring period, especially when ownership changes. So how are we going to ensure that that tracking occurs, whether it's through a deed restriction or maybe it's just through county records?
If I may, through there, sorry.
Sure, go ahead, Vandy.
I do, so some of the questions that were brought up during public comment, I do have, I don't know if it's an answer, but I do have a response to certain ones. Do you want me to do those while you're bringing these up, or do you want me to do it at the end?
Go for it, go ahead.
Well, for tracking, so we do use a system called Track It to track our permits. We do have a way in that system to, you know, provide a, quote, restriction on that parcel, in the sense of a note to future planners what has occurred there. This is the same tracking technique we use with the Redwood Valley Fire Complex individuals. We have this note on Track It that says this parcel was affected by the Redwood Valley Oak Fire, or sorry, the Redwood Valley Fire. You know, permits can't be issued on that parcel until certain criteria are met. So we do have a way to track these without it, and it would be at no cost to the applicant. So I just want to address that one.
Great, and so Vandy, that sounds like that's for internal purposes. Is that also on the public's viewing of the eTrack-It system?
I don't believe it is, but we can look into that.
It would be great if it could be publicly accessible, just because as people are buying parcels, it would be devastating under certain circumstances to have done your due diligence as a buyer only to find out that there's, you know, restrictions that were not found in a title search, but were restrictions on a property. So, and I know that a lot of realtors, myself included, advise their clients to use eTrack-It to figure out what's going on with a piece of property. So I think public accessibility to those records would be key. I do have a couple more points here. Vandy, this is a question for you, because I'm really hearing the public's comments about you know, if we make the permit process for doing the right thing, for being in compliance, too onerous, that basically the goal of no net loss is compromised. And I know that that no net loss is not explicitly stated in the ordinance, but we can kind of shoot ourselves in the foot if we make it too expensive and too onerous. I'm curious if in your research, Vandy, if what you found in other counties as far as their requirements for individual tree removal permits. Is it common to require a technical report? I guess I'm curious if we might be able to scrap the technical report just for a single oak tree removal, but keep those requirements for impacts to oak woodlands.
So there are, I kind of drew on several counties, including San Luis Obispo, Butte, and Sonoma. And I know Sonoma and I believe Butte both do focus on individual trees. And so you would be getting a permit to impact a single tree. I haven't researched the cost of what those permits are, but they do permitting for individual trees.
Sure, and I'm supportive of the permit for the individual trees, especially those big heritage ones. I'm just questioning that added expense of the technical report requirement for the individual tree permit.
Well, I mean, again, this is all recommended. So if the planning commission would like that report removed from that individual thing, that is more, you can provide that as direction to us. I mean, that is what the workshop is for. So that was just to kind of follow what other counties had did. So if that's something that the commission does not feel is appropriate for this county, then they're more than welcome to direct staff to remove that.
Sure, and I guess what I'm curious about is, did you find that other counties do or do not require that technical report for a single tree removal?
I believe Sonoma does.
Okay, thanks. Great, that's it for me at this time.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Purnell. We'll go on to Commissioner Nelson.
So I have done some replanting of oak trees, and it's not difficult. I'm wondering if the county could, number one, provide a list of nurseries that might grow trees for people, and number two, find some directions on planting your own trees if someone decides to take that choice. I want to echo the fact that the 025 chart, oak tree canopy heritage classifications is not, or it's confusing. It seems like it could use some improvement. The 16:1 does seem onerous as a minimum. I would think perhaps a landowner could be given a choice. And I also want to echo the choice to do fewer, recognizing that it may lengthen the process.
If I may, through the chair.
Yes, please.
So the ratio again was just kind of out of conversation with some of our working groups. That's not that number can be changed if recommended by the commission. The reason we didn't go with what other counties have is because Mendocino is not other counties. Our woodlands are much more pristine and larger than other counties. So I don't think doing, we shouldn't rubber stamp what other counties are doing onto this. And then I don't oppose a lower number, but I don't necessarily, from my planning perspective, agree with using the same thing as other counties. And then you mentioned, what was the other thing you mentioned?
The chart.
Sorry, I'll let you continue. Oh, CDFW. So the reason that CDFW is included in a lot of these decisions is that the County of Mendocino doesn't have any environmental planner. A lot of counties do have environmental either offices or a planner within their office that does environmental issues. I mean, even the Mendocino County Department of Transportation has an environmental person in their department, but our department does not. So that is the reason for including CDFW, because we just don't have an environmental specialist that, has the information and knowledge and education to make those determinations.
Thank you, Vandy. The 60% requirement, somebody made a comment about that. So if you're trying to replace one tree and the requirement is 60, you'd end up with 9 trees. I don't know if that's what our intent is.
That is the intent, but again, the mitigation or the management plan does allow for thinning. So, you want those 9 trees to succeed, but if in the management plan, if that's too many, you can cut it back depending on what's adopted with that plan.
Well, I guess you could do firewood with the extra trees too.
Yeah. And then also, just because I just remembered you brought it up, there is the 16-to-1 ratio. There is already language in the ordinance proposed that if the 16-to-1 is too intense, for example, if it's too much for a 1 acre parcel, there is the option that the applicant can discuss with planning and building and CDFW on an alternative.
That would help. If you're removing a number of trees, I don't know what the max might be, but if somebody's planting a vineyard and they want to remove 20 trees, 16-to-1 ends up being a lot of trees. I was wondering what some examples of the impacts of removing the environmental impacts. I was wondering some examples of that might be available if a person is thinking about a permit. The same thing. Now just to bring you up to where I'm at. I'm on page 8, and I'm referring to B, C, or no, 2C, and again 2F.
Sorry, was that a question or was
no?
there
I just a comment. Just something for you to consider adding to it. Also, if you're doing timber improvement, and I don't know if Randy might have, I'm not sure what I'm asking actually, but if you're doing improvement of a timber plan, sometimes you want to remove oaks, and I'm wondering if that would be, you would have to get an extra permit to remove oaks if you're doing a timber stand improvement.
No, not if it's part of a timber harvest plan or another plan adopted that's in relation to the Forest Practice Act. Anything under the Forest Practice Act is exempt.
I'll just chime in real quick, Greg. If the Forest Practice Act doesn't address what we call Group B species, or basically Orcas genus species. So it would have to be something that would have to be handled by the county.
All right, thank you for that. You answered that one already. So I'm not sure I mentioned it or not, but if the county could come up with a list of nurseries where people could go to have seedlings grown for them, I think that would be I think that'd be very helpful. So that's all my comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Nelson. And I did want to make one comment in addressing something you brought up about California Division of Fish and Wildlife. And the fact that Vandy stated we do not have an environmental person in the planning department. Based on the cost that the applicant has to pay every time CDF is involved, I would think that the county, even if they do not have an environmental person in their department, they could contract that out. So that's just another avenue that perhaps we could look at.
That's kind of what I wanted to touch on too, that it seems like if we have them in other departments, maybe we could just buy some of that time. If environmental health has an environmental planner, maybe we could buy some hours of that person's time per week to do this work and not have to involve the state.
Well,
I agree. And I actually, before we go on, I was just going to call on you, Diana, for your input. So you're next on the board. Thank you.
Oh, good, great. Well, I'll start off with my feedback for that. I actually disagree that that should be in-house, and why I disagree that should be in-house as far as Fish and Wildlife. Because when it's a state agency, we're a county agency. It's really important to have the check and balances about that, just like air quality. right? And so there's reasons for that, right? There's reasons for, and I love the planning department and all the hard work in environmental health that they do and DOT, but it's a different, it's fish and wildlife is a much bigger issue in the sense of state agencies in interacting. And because I deal with these consultants, I think it's important to have new, fresh eyes that are not part of the county. If we're looking at protecting environment, protecting the legislation from the state, it's important. And that's going to lead me to a couple in the next thing. So like I said before, I prefer the carrot than the stick. I'd rather, I really want our planning department and our lead agencies and the community members to come up with a way that if we want to protect our wildland oaks, we need to do it, to be really successful, we need to do it in a way that is cost effective to the property owner, right? At the same time, making sure that the process is to meeting an ordinance's legislation. So we have some ways to monitor. That's something that we're not gonna come up with today, but it's something I'm gonna, keep pushing for. The end goal result is to protect these our wildland oaks. So it's something for us to get creative with as planners and planning commission representatives. So then the next issue is I'd like to talk about when people talk about firewood. Okay, firewood. When I heard Ace of Spades say he burns 4 cords for a single household, a light goes on to me. Because it's once again tied into the bigger issue here, right? Carbon. How do we get carbon neutral? Rangelands inland, we should be looking at solar arrays and using today the big sweep in trying to get carbon neutral from somebody who designs residences, right? Is you look at solar arrays and then you look at what we have today, electric heat exchangers. And those will reduce, when people are talking about burning 4 cords of wood, we need to be looking at well, maybe that worked here, but going forward, it's not going to work for the next 2 generations behind us if our environment sustains itself. So I really think that when we're looking at the firewood issue in our heritage oaks, sure, we use them, but we also as planners and planning commissioners really be looking at how do we give more incentives to the solar getting off the grid or being on the grid with a solar array and getting into today what's the most effective, efficient way are heat exchangers to heat our domestic spaces. I want to just say that, and then I like I think it was Tess Alvin who talked about ceased and desist. If there's got to be a way to put some teeth into the ordinance other than just fines, money fines, and I concur. The list and the charts could be clearer as far as what the other commissioners spoke to. And ending is thank you for doing all the work everybody does.
Commissioner Wiedemann, I did have a question. I was a little unclear when you started about the CDF. Are you supporting including them or doing it on a local level?
No, I want CDF to be its own. Well, not CDF, Fish and Wildlife. Is that what you're asking?
CFW.
Yes, I'm.
Okay,
Yes.
so what I want is that to be a separate agency, not in-house with the county. I think it's a state agency. There needs to be, Vandy and the rest of you, check and balances on your work, right? It's a good thing, just like there's check and balances on all, those of us who do our work. So I think it's important to keep that agency separate.
So I guess my question is, and a lot of the items in this proposed ordinance do address that Fish and Wildlife will be involved. So I guess I'm still asking the question, are you saying no, keep them out, or yes, they would be involved in the process?
No, you keep them in, but they're not in-house. We don't have a Fish and Wildlife person that the county, as a planner, that the county is assuming that role. That is you have to go to a Fish and Wildlife from the state agency, which we do now.
I understand that. I guess my concern again is the applicant here is another fee where they're going to have to pay California Fish and Wildlife that continues to go up over $2,000 now. And I think 12 years ago when I started, it was around $800. And I've preached on this numerous times,
Yeah.
but anyway,
so
that's my concern. Is another fee for the,
if I may, then the issue is, how do we address the fees? Then the issue is the separation of hats is important. So now we need to take on, how do we figure out a way that we address those fees? I agree, they're too expensive. So that's the battle.
Well, I would just like to, no one would be paying CDFW. It's kind of how we work with them now. A lot of our projects that go to them, they just, generously give us feedback on it. So that would be kind of the similar situation. So when we do go to CDFW for advice on maybe alternatives to the ratios, the applicant wouldn't be paying CDFW. Yeah.
okay, thank you, Vandy. I believe we're down to Commissioner Jacobson. Would you like your input, please?
I guess since we're on this subject, Department of Fish and Wildlife is heavily involved in the cannabis program and charges exorbitant fees for their consultation. I guess, Vanny, what is CDFW going to be doing then if they're involved in these projects without going out on site to evaluate these? And I can't imagine they're going to be doing this for free.
Well, again, any use permit or projects we currently have, if we refer to CFW, they do provide their services without a fee to us. So
what are the services going to include?
So for example, if the 16-to-1 replanting ratio is not conducive to this particular site, planning and building would discuss with the applicant and CDFW, and CDFW would really provide that biological, environmental perspective and knowledge and education that the county doesn't currently have. So it's it's like a consultation with them as opposed to straight up, we're not sending this permit to them for their approval. We're working with CDFW and the applicant to come to that viable alternative to the replanting ratio.
Well, the county does have biologists on staff, which would be qualified to actually develop these permits. I don't understand why we wouldn't use one of the county biologists.
Because they're not within the planning and building department. That would require the other department agreeing to allow their staff to come and assist our staff.
That's ridiculous. You can't. I mean, you should be able to move somebody from within the county to to take on another project like this. But if that's the way it's run, that's fine. But anyway, I do know they have biologists on staff that would be qualified to do this. Getting back to getting two sets of eyes on this, you're actually going to have a consultant that's going to be developing these management plans. And then at the same time, you're going to have county, I guess it's county staff, also looking at these projects. So you're going to have two sets of eyes on this. I just think that we're going to be increasing the, I understand that this CDFW does this for free, but I can't imagine that we don't have people qualified at the county to also put another set of eyes on this that would be qualified to actually develop a permit like this. I don't want to see CDFW involved in this because I can see it turning into a much larger endeavor than we ever imagined. I mean, if we do this, we're going to be doing botanical surveys. We're going to be doing we're going to be doing spotted owl surveys. You're going to have sensitive species analysis for each one of these projects. And I just see the costs of these going up dramatically. I have is I'm really, we've got this cannabis cultivation program going on here with the county. We can't staff that program. We don't have the money to staff the program. We have all these people waiting for applications, and now we're looking at trying to develop another program. And I think sometimes we need to look at where we are sometimes, and as to whether we actually have the capability to take on a project like this. So, and if we do, and we insist on doing this, I think we need to pare it down. I think heritage trees are important, and I can see us concentrating on the protection of heritage trees. The definition of an oak woodland is just way too small. It would have to be at a minimum of an acre to 5 acres for me to actually want to see something like this move on. A quarter acre is a fifth of an acre is 52.7 foot radius. So that's 100-foot diameter. And a quarter acre, I'm not sure, it's somewhere around a 70-foot radius. So when you talk about a quarter acre woodland, you're talking about an extremely small area. And I think this is another area that needs to be revisited. Also, the definition of a heritage tree, when we start adding up the diameters of trees that, let's say there's four, you have 4 trees that are forked and they're each at 5 inches in diameter. It's 20 inches in diameter, which would make that a heritage tree. I'm not sure where county staff came up with this definition. Maybe they came up with it from Napa County, or Sonoma County or San Luis Obispo. But to me, I'd have a problem calling that a heritage tree. The 24-inch diameter is fine, but adding up small forks in a tree and trying to define that as a heritage tree, I don't think is reasonable. So, like I guess my issue here is let's look at this and try to pare it down and make it feasible, not only for the citizens here in Mendocino County, but for county staff. And that's what I'm hoping for.
Thank you, Commissioner Jacobson, and I appreciate all your comments, and all I can do is actually echo the same things as what you addressed. Thank you very much. I'm not sure at this point if we have any other discussion among the commissioners or if we should go on to the next item. And this would be, I believe, would this be coming up at our next meeting on November 19th, or would this, and I'm asking staff this, or would this be coming up in the December meeting?
This would, the ordinance would be brought back at the December 17th meeting with revisions.
Okay, thank you, Vandy. So I think at this point, Yes, go ahead, Commissioner Nelson.
Sorry to interrupt the flow here. The two letters I've referenced earlier, one from Farm Bureau and one from North Bay Realtors, are pretty extensive. And it might take all day to address all the issues. I'm wondering if staff can address the issues and we could get that get those answers back before the next meeting. I thought they brought up a lot of good points.
Hi, so if I may,
I
through the
agree.
chair.
Yes.
So do you want responses to the letters as like their own attachment, or do you want me at the next meeting to go through the ordinance and discuss where those concerns were addressed?
I would like to receive your answers prior to the meeting.
Okay.
So I have a chance to consider them.
Deputy County Counsel Matthew Kudrowski, just to that point, quick briefly. Is that something that the commission is looking at before the 10-day in advance deadline this will be posted for the December 17th meeting? I think if the commission was directing staff to have a memorandum published in advance beyond that time point, we want to put that on the website and make that a public document as well. I think typically what I think the process from here would be, we're taking in all the specific comments and questions from the commission. I'm hearing requests that the staff specifically address the realtors and the Farm Bureau letters that were submitted and want to report back on or before the 17th. I guess I just want to clarify, is it before, would the commission want to have this before that December 7th timeframe, the 10 days in advance? And I guess I'll also put to staff just to make sure that overall time frame works given the questions and direction to what the commission's directing to be reviewed.
If I had it a day before the meeting, I'd be that would satisfy my concern.
I agree.
I didn't hear what you said, Greg.
I don't need to have the information, the responses 10 days before. If I had a day or two before the meeting, I would be satisfied.
Deputy County Counsel Matthew Kudrowski, to that point, I think the agenda posting packet will be available 10 days in advance. So the staff memorandum for the item, based on the direction I'm hearing, would include this review and analysis of the commission's questions, concerns, and those concerns raised in public comment.
I believe what you're saying, County Counsel, is that the answers need to be posted to the public within the 10-day period. Is that what I'm hearing?
Just to clarify, no, I'm saying that agenda materials for a planning commission meeting are posted 10 days in advance of the meeting. So what I was trying to clarify was whether the Commissioner Nelson wanted something released to the public and the commission before 10 days in advance, or if including that in the usual staff report process was sufficient. And it sounds like I'm hearing that including that in the staff report that will be available 10 days in advance would be sufficient from Commissioner Nelson. If there's that's what the commission would desire, I just wanted to, my point was to clarify timelines of documents for staff to prepare.
Well, that would work for me.
Okay.
That's fine for me.
That'll work.
Can I add one thing, Chair Orwell?
Yes, go ahead.
I was wondering if there could be something researched, or just, it doesn't have to be long, but on the open space banks that County Council was referring to when, I was referring to, hey, what's the incentive? Can we try to offer another angle at protecting our, heritage oaks, etc.? Go ahead, Bandy.
Oh, I mean, I can consider, or I can take a look at alternatives while revising the ordinance. Yes,
it would be good.
Anything else from commissioners?
I do have some final comments. And Also, I just want to thank Vandy because I know that this has been a lot of work that has gone into this to date, taking into account many different stakeholder positions. So Vandy, even though everybody's really digging into this pretty well today, it's appreciated, the work that you've put into it so far. There were a couple of other things that I wanted to comment on. I think we've touched on it, but I want to underscore my support for redefining impact to allow for maintenance. You know, I live very near and very under heritage oak trees myself, and I know that maintenance on those is important to be able to, you know, continue to live near them. And then also on that point of, you know, whether or not the commission decides to recommend adoption of the ordinance for 3 years before we revisit, I am very supportive of that because I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to find the happy middle ground between protecting our unique county oak resources, but also not creating something, you know, so much new red tape that it becomes burdensome and just this huge cross to bear for Mendocino County. And so when we do, if we are to come back in 3 years and revisit and possibly revise, I think we need to have some understanding of what our criteria for success is. How will we know if it's successful? How are we defining success? Is it that people are applying for permits? Is it that our oak resources are being protected, and do we want to try and quantify that? Kind of implies that, you know, we need a baseline there, which I know we don't have. That's been a big part of the discussion leading up to now, is that we don't have adequate mapping or understanding of what our baseline oak resources are. Do we want to, you know, measure success against whether or not replanting is happening? I think some thought might want to go into what the success for criteria is so that we can have a thoughtful discussion about, you know, whether or not it's being successful. So those are my last 2 points.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Purnell. Yes, Commissioner Nelson.
I was having trouble getting unmuted. So one last item I had a question is on page 7. I believe it is under E4. One of the requirements for approval is the value of oak habitat is not diminished. And I would like some clarity on that. I'm not quite sure what staff is looking for. And I don't necessarily need the answer right now. I don't know if it's a simple answer or a complex answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Nelson. Yes, go ahead, Vandy.
Is Vandy or Randy? Okay, I guess it's Randy. Anyway, I have a question, Vandy. If it hasn't been done, I'd like to see it done. With the aerial imagery that we have now, and it's fairly easy to date, has staff done anything regarding the acres of oak woodland that we have in Mendocino County, let's say, and the loss of oak woodland over the last 10 years, and if there has been, and so as Allison was talking about, if we could develop a baseline from, let's say, 10 years ago and see where we're at today, and then it would help if in the future at the same time. So I think it's important that we establish some baseline for this.
Do you want me to respond, or is that just a comment?
No, I want you to respond.
So there is a previous study, I think from 2008 8 or 9 that examined the oak resources of the county. It didn't have the best mapping of those resources, but it does have some information on what was existing at that time. So I can take a look at that and see what I can find for what's presently are existing.
I think if you did it today, you'd get a lot better information because we have historical aerial imagery that you could research. Where in 2008, that was like the Model A that we had in 1904 compared to what we have today. So I would like to see staff look at the imagery today of the past and develop a baseline from that.
Okay, thank you. And I don't know if, Vandy, if you wanted to address Commissioner Nelson's comment about the value of oak habitat not being diminished, or if you wanted to bring that up at our next workshop in December.
I can bring that up in my next workshop because I would have to go back through my previous notes to see not only when that came up, but why it came up.
Okay, thank you, Vandy. Anything else? Seeing nothing, I think we can go on with the next public hearing on, what was the date, December 17th?
17th, yeah.
Yes, that's correct. And we will also be having public comment at that time, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Then I think we're ready to go on to item 7, matters from staff.
Thank you, Chair and Commission.
Actually, and Deputy County Counsel Matthew Kudrowski, on the agenda that I have from online, technically item 7 is approval of minutes and then 8 is adjournment. I believe the matters from Commission and staff were inadvertently left off of this. So I don't know that we can really entertain a whole lot for those particular items. I can add, just as a kind of to append to the director's report and the question asked there, that the Board of Supervisors did choose to, regarding the Pine Mountain Cell Tower, they took a tentative vote that would have denied the appeal and approved the project with modifications to make that tower a monopine. They directed staff to bring back a resolution to that effect, and that's anticipated to be on the consent calendar on the November 17th meeting.
Matthew, what was that? What was the recommendation? I couldn't make that out.
I'm sorry. They denied the appeal of the approval, but the board has the ability to modify the approval as well. So they denied the appeal, but approved the project, modifying it to be a monopine instead of a lattice tower.
That's what we tried to do in the first. Anyway, okay.
Thank you, County Council. And I understand where you're coming from on the difference in the agendas. I received an updated agenda last night, or I guess it was last night, from staff, and I did see where there were changes, and I did have a concern about the legality of those items. So going back to the original agenda that was given to the public that are missing matters from staff and matters from the commission. You've already addressed the question I had about the cell phone tower. Thank you very much. So I think we then cannot address matters from commission. Is that what I'm hearing? Matt?
Deputy County Counsel Matthew Kudrowski, I believe that's correct.
So Commissioner Nelson here, we have another meeting this afternoon, and it does have those 2 items on there on the agenda.
Deputy County Counsel Matthew Kudrowski, I believe that meeting is Airport Land Use Commission for a separate item on that calendar.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Sorry.
For today, I think if there's any questions that the commissioners want to direct to or send to the director directly beyond this meeting, that's fine. And then we'll ensure that on the 19th at the next meeting of the Planning Commission, the agenda will have those items.
Okay, thank you. Then going back to the agenda that was published to the, or that was released to the public. We're now on approval of the minutes, of which there are none. So I believe our only other item is adjournment. Is that correct, County Council?
Yes.
So moved.
I'll second.
Thank you. Thank you. And we are adjourned at 11:49. Thank you all very much. Staff and Vanny particularly, thank you so much for all your input, and we'll look forward to revisiting this on December 17th, I believe it was.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners.
Oops.